The Gulf Injustice Podcast, the official podcast of Detained in Dubai with Radha Stirling.
Welcome to the Gulf Injustice Podcast Drugs Edition. Today we're focusing on Dubai's desperate drug enforcement procedures, which are seeing completely innocent foreigners thrown into desert jails on the basis of incentivised informants and staged sting operations set up to win convictions that see police officers financially and professionally gain. Desperate for promotions and financial benefits, officers and prosecutors have little regard for evidence and will push for lengthy prison terms even where innocence is clear. Don't do the crime if you can't do the time. Now, there is a stigma attached with drugs charges and a presumption of guilt. When someone we know is arrested in the Middle East, or Dubai as we're talking about today, and charged with consumption of drugs, possession of drugs, or perhaps selling or dealing drugs, there's a presumption of guilt. If we read an article in the newspaper, we assume that someone was stupid enough to get involved in drugs in the Middle East, where the penalties are more severe. But what we're finding more and more is that there is a culture of police enforcement that is causing innocent people to be arrested, charged, convicted and sentenced for drug-related offences when they're entirely innocent and have never touched drugs in their life. Now, our organisation, Detained in Dubai, was founded by me in 2008 after a friend and colleague of mine was arrested on drugs allegations. Now, during the time that I assisted him, we found that the evidence the police held was in fact fabricated evidence. We also uncovered that enforcement officers, airport immigration, police officers, and people within the police enforcement system are given financial incentives as well as the possibility of raises within their employment or promotions. And this has in turn created a culture of police looking to secure convictions against innocent people simply for their own personal gain or personal profit. Now, we've seen so many cases of people being convicted without sufficient evidence or without evidence except for a witness statement, and that witness statement could be coming from a police informant or someone who themselves has been arrested and charged with a drugs-related offence. The police are then encouraging them to hand over their contacts list in return for a more lenient sentence. Now, that doesn't mean they'll get the lenient sentence, but they're certainly promised that. They're incentivised to hand over as many people as they can, and therefore the informants are handing over contacts or people that are just in their mobile phone for some other reason, perhaps a neighbour or some acquaintance they've met at a club. They're handing over these names to the police, and the police are taking them with that person's testimony as sufficient to charge them, hold them, and convict them. Now, in one of these cases, Andy Neal's, the person who handed over his telephone number, and this is a family man, a veteran, who had nothing to do with drugs. He suffers from PTSD, and he'd been living out there with his family, working, and with his wife, who was also a teacher. And suddenly, the police arrive at his apartment, bang down the door, and take him into custody, saying that he's selling drugs, dealing drugs, and all sorts of things. Now, they investigate his apartment, find absolutely nothing. They find no other evidence except for this witness statement from some person that Andy Neal doesn't even know. Now, the witness, when he realised that it was Andy Neal that they were investigating, he actually went to the police and said, no, that wasn't the man that I intended for you to arrest. That wasn't the one I was referring to. And he tried to correct his statement, but the police wouldn't accept his correction. They held on to him and, in fact, escalated the matter to Abu Dhabi. So he was transferred, after several months incarceration in Dubai, he was transferred to Abu Dhabi, and this is after significant criticism of having held a British national in custody without evidence sufficient to warrant a charge. He was then handed to Abu Dhabi and ultimately acquitted, but not before spending more than a year in prison. The damage that that's done to Andy Neal and to his family is unfathomable, but it continues to happen. We have Darren Crawford, a flight attendant who was recently arrested and charged on the basis of someone else who was in possession of drugs, just because of her acquaintance to him. She'd only met him a couple of weeks ago. All of her tests returned negative. She had no drugs in her system, but they still kept her. And if it weren't for the international media campaign and the pressure from the British Embassy and also from Emirates Airlines staff and crew supporting her, we imagine that she would still be in prison now, perhaps with a drugs conviction attached to her. Then we have other people who have been arrested on the basis of travelling in a car with someone who had drugs that they didn't even know about, or being at a cafe with someone who had drugs that they didn't know about. So this is extremely concerning, that someone could be convicted simply through their knowledge of someone else or their acquaintance with someone else, regardless they perhaps never have even had a conversation about drugs with that person, but they can still be arrested, charged, convicted and sentenced to a minimum of 3 years in prison, but usually more. In the case of Arthur Legeska, he was charged with a drug-related offence after a friendship meltdown with a sheikh of Abu Dhabi. The drugs allegations were levied upon him without evidence, and he was jailed for quite a long time, almost over a year in fact, and he's now written a book about his experience during his incarceration in Abu Dhabi. He was beaten, he was tortured, and he was raped. And all of this is because the judicial system allowed him to be charged, convicted, sentenced to a crime that he did not commit. We have so many things happening within the police system over there, and the UAE authorities are aware of it. The royals are aware of it. So why are the police not being told to put an end to these arbitrary and massive arrests that are being made? There are sting operations, and we're going to be talking to the mother of someone who's fallen victim to a sting operation designed by police to, again, lure someone into a situation where they can pass as having almost enough evidence for a conviction, and they jump the gun, and before anything even happens, they arrest this man, charge him, and he's heading towards a conviction. Now, what's he done? Absolutely nothing. But there are sting operations happening all over the place in Dubai. This has really increased since coronavirus. There is a massive effort from Dubai police to round up any drugs-related networks, and that's all well and good. But the problem is when you cast the net so wide as they are and arrest anyone who knows anything or anyone that has anything to do with drugs, and that's sufficient to have them investigated, interrogated, held in custody, and eventually potentially charged just because someone pointed the finger at them without evidence. That's it, hearsay evidence, one single person's statement. But the other thing that the police are trying to do, and they did with Andy Neal and they did with Arthur Legeska and wanted to do with Darren Crawford, is to have them confess to a crime they haven't committed. They want them to confess or sign a document in Arabic, perhaps without the English translation, or an English will be given on one piece of paper and an Arabic on another, rather than having them on the same piece of paper. And the police will tell that person that it's a translation of what they've said in the interview, which is usually that they're not guilty, that they're innocent, that they don't know anything about these drugs allegations. But when they translate into the Arabic document and present it to the accused, they'll say that this accurately reflects what they've told police, which is not true. And this is something that fundamentally has to change, because a confession is sufficient evidence under UAE law for a judge to convict someone, even if they later retract that confession, even if they turn up in court and say, I'm not guilty, actually I didn't sign that document. That won't be sufficient for the judge to overturn that original confession that the police claim to have, which they would take with more merit, Perhaps the judge will think that the accused has since spoken to a lawyer and the lawyer has said to retract it, but the judge will believe that whatever they said at the first interview rings more true. But this isn't the case. People are tricked into signing confessions, they're beaten, they're intimidated, and essentially they're tortured. And this is why cases have actually been brought before the United Nations on these forced confessions, these interrogations, beatings by police, and taking subjects from cold to hot in ice boxes and depriving them of food and water and toilet facilities, and then making these promises that if they just sign this document, they'll be released. Now, this is not an acceptable way to conduct a police investigation and is clearly police and prosecutors simply looking to achieve their financial incentives and their promotions rather than caring about the life of an individual, which is absurd. And this is a country that's looking to attract more and more tourists. But if you can visit the UAE, as Darren Crawford did, if you can visit the UAE and you can be arrested because you know someone who might know someone else who's involved with drugs, and you can be convicted, this is not a safe place to visit. And the same can be said for Andy Neal. Andy, a veteran, a family man, 2 children, and not on drugs by any means, has nothing to do with drugs, and he suffered more than a year in prison. This is unbelievable, and much of that time was in solitary confinement. He needed medical care, he was denied medical care. So it's more than just, someone was falsely accused of drugs, don't worry, the court will eventually find that they're innocent. No, they won't. They will convict them. And so long as if your government doesn't stand up for you, or if you don't have anyone lobbying for you, you could end up spending your entire life in prison on these falsified charges just so that some Dubai police officer can get a promotion or a cash injection. And this is what I'm seeing with the coronavirus issue. I'm saying that perhaps the police need to create more income for themselves. Perhaps they're a little bit desperate at the moment, but these sting operations are just really growing in their audacity, the way that they're doing them, the luring, trying to bring people into their net. And then once they do, even if that person was innocent, they've made them guilty, and everyone they know, and then they're getting a lot of incentives. So there's absolutely a complete disregard for innocence or for guilt. There's a disregard for nationality. So we are talking about Americans, British, Europeans, anyone essentially. And if that country doesn't stand up for their citizen and secure their release, well then they're going to spend all of that time in prison. South African father Xola Msomi was working in Dubai when he was set up by his former Egyptian flatmate. Xola has been described to me as a trusting and polite person and a hard-working fitness fanatic. Over coffee in Dubai, Xola's former flatmate had desperately tried to push Xola to sell him drugs. Xola repeatedly told him he didn't know where to buy drugs, he doesn't sell drugs, and he has nothing to do with drugs. But Shehab wouldn't take no for an answer. He was in a frantic state and suddenly threw cash at Xola, who didn't even want it. Moments later, police entered the room and arrested Xola, who has now been charged with drug dealing. The cash was police marked, and Shehab was officially a pawn in a police sting operation designed to create criminals that didn't exist. And this is not the first time. Veteran Andy Neal was arrested after police raided his home in Dubai. If we had not fought so hard for justice, Andy could still be in prison today. Now we talk to Xola's friend Melody, who is desperately seeking justice. All right, so thanks for joining us on the Gulf Injustice podcast. Now we're talking about Xola today. So I wanted to know, how did you meet Xola, and can you tell us a little bit about his personality and what his background is?
Sure. So I met Xola when he was working in Gaucho. I was invited to a cosmopolitan event, and he was there, and he's just a really nice guy. That my friend, she was the manager of Gaucho, and she introduced me to him, and we hit it off very easily because he's just a really nice person.
And when was the last time you saw him now?
So now the last time I saw him was 3.5 months ago, because I left, because I lost my job in Dubai because of the coronavirus. So I went back to France and I haven't seen him since then.
So, I mean, obviously you must have been absolutely shocked that he's been arrested. And have you been communicating with him while he's been held?
Well, I'm really lucky to have my number still. I kept my my UAE number, so thank God for that, because he can contact me. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to contact people that have a foreign number. And I was completely shocked. I was devastated, to be honest. This has been the hardest 2.5 months of my life.
You know, for one, that he hasn't had a history in drugs, and that these allegations against him are basically fabricated, and that he's in...
Exactly, and it's just the way it's been done. It's just terrible. It's awful.
Did it shock you to learn that this is actually a common occurrence, that people are being detained by police, that they're being prosecuted and without evidence just because someone says they've committed a crime? Did that shock you at all?
Yeah, of course. And just the idea of having someone that you know setting you up is just mortifying and ruining your life.
Because it was his ex-flatmate, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. So basically someone you've known, and it can be an acquaintance, it can be a friend, it can be a flatmate, and I've actually just issued a warning to people in the UAE that this could happen to them as well. That it could be anyone you know, and that person could be pressured or potentially incentivized by police to give up the names of people who might be involved in drugs, or to encourage them or set them up in some way. And police promise that, let's call them an informant, that they're either not going to be prosecuted themselves or that they're going to get incentives. And I think it's really happening more and more now because of coronavirus. I think people are more desperate that you know, a little bit of money, while all of these businesses are failing and the economy's down and they can't travel, I think they're more likely to accept offers like this from the police. And I think that's what's happening. But I mean, this must be absolutely devastating for Xola. How's he coping?
He's a little bit better now that he's been moved. So for 2 months, he was in a basement with no access to daylight, which is completely inhumane treatment. I can't believe they actually did that. So he's been out. Well, now he's been in a part of the jail where he actually can access daylight, which is a big difference. And I think he's quite grateful and thankful for that. But at the same time, he told me he never thought this would go so far and be such a big deal. And he can't believe the actual charges on him, because he's not at all a drug trafficker.
He's
like,
not a drug trafficker. He's not a drug dealer. He hasn't arranged any drug sale. He hasn't even, you know, he's not involved in anything like that. And he never wanted to be. He you know, what's he doing over there? Is he working, or was he just traveling?
Yeah, he was working. He lost his job at Gaucho, and then for a few months, and then found a new job about a month, about a few weeks before he was arrested. So I'm sure he's devastated because he needs the money to take care of. He's got a little daughter that he needs to take care of, and that's just heartbreaking for everyone.
And how old is she?
3.
3.
Yeah.
So, I mean, essentially for drug dealing, he's facing quite a number of years in prison if they really push it to the extent of the law. It must be absolutely frightening for him at this point, and his family, of course. They must be really struggling as well, are they?
Yeah, definitely. I think they try not to be too stressed, because obviously we're hoping that the law or the judge is gonna see that he's not a dealer and that he got set up. So I don't think any person in their right mind would agree that that's a good way of getting people behind bars. So yeah.
It's terrible, isn't it? And I've just been talking today to a number of colleagues about Andy Neal, who was ultimately acquitted of the charges that they levied against him. They had no evidence of his crimes either, and of course he was totally innocent. But it took over a year for the courts in Abu Dhabi to finally acquit him and let him travel home. And the thing is, this can't happen again. When you see something like that, and it was brought to the attention of the international media and of the authorities in the UAE, you would think that they would have changed some process or procedure to ensure that this kind of abuse doesn't happen again. But we're seeing it now with Xola. We're seeing it with Darren Crawford, who was arrested a couple of months ago. We're seeing it again and again, and it's astonishing. Have you found it all? Because I did discuss this with the family of Darren Crawford. Have you found at all that there's a little stigma attached when you tell friends or family that it's a drugs charge? How did they respond? Were they suspicious that, oh, maybe he did it, or maybe, did they maybe believe that he had done something like that? Because there's people who think where there's smoke, there's fire, but in the Middle East, that's completely a different story. But did you have to go through that with his friends, or?
Yeah, of course, they were all completely shocked. And obviously smoking recreationally or in another country or something like this can happen, and it does happen to a lot of people, but actually being accused of drug dealing, that's not possible and crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, we hear about setups that have happened in movies in Thailand and other places, but the UAE really pride themselves on selling their police and their supercars and make it look like they have real evidence laws and procedures and that people would follow. And the only reason that anyone would see otherwise is perhaps if they specifically and really carefully Googled Dubai legal abuse or something like this. But as far as in the glossy magazines on the flights, and even the government warnings don't go to the extent of saying that you could be arrested if anyone makes an allegation against you for any reason whatsoever, even if there's no other evidence that could lead to your prosecution in another country, like in South Africa or Britain or France. In the UAE, that allegation is sufficient to put you behind bars. I mean, that to me, that just shows that the country is dangerous for tourists, that it's dangerous for expats, because anyone can put you behind bars. They have so much power. And the Egyptian man, he was Egyptian, wasn't he, the accuser in this case?
Yes, he is. Yeah.
So this Egyptian national has a lot of power at his fingertips if he can simply point the finger at someone and have them arrested and charged. And we have to find out, what is he getting out of this? How many other people has he accused? Is it just Xola, or is there a whole network of people that he's being the fisherman, essentially reeling in these convictions for the prosecutors, who are being then financially rewarded for these successful prosecutions? It's absurd. I would love to see that investigated. But in the meantime, it's absolutely ridiculous that the South African embassy doesn't follow this up. Have they been helpful?
I can't really say they have been. I think they're trying, but at the same time, they don't want to get involved. That's clear. So one lady has called Xola to see if he was okay, but just on a healthy point of view, on a health point of view, not on a mental point of view, not on a lawyer's point of view, nothing like that. And because of the COVID, Xola is not allowed to see his lawyer, which is crazy. Again, I think it's so unfair. And he's not allowed to see anyone, so he has no visits. And yeah, it's just a terrible story.
And we can see Xola's a very popular guy. He's got a lot of support. We've just heard from his friend Melody, and now we're going to hear from his cousin and mother, all the way from South Africa, who are advocating for his release and doing everything they can to bring their family member home.
Good evening. My name is Xola Riley Mtembu. I'm a close friend, long-time friend, even cousin. You can call it. You can flip it however you want to flip it. But I've known Xola Msomi for since grade three. Grade three, and it's just been me and him and a whole lot of other brothers. We grew up in primary school. We all keep in touch, and I'm most possibly the most constant one around him. And to talk about him and say what kind of a person he is, he is a humbled soul, very humbled. He can teach. He loves to teach. He's coached cricket. He's coached, chess. We've played chess. He's a very open-minded person, willing to learn anything, anytime. He blends into other cultures as easy as he can. Talk to them, talk to anybody. He's a people person. I can tell you that there are sides of him, like any other human being, that obviously he's well reserved. So he doesn't just bounce around everywhere. He doesn't just hang around with the who's who. Only if it's selected for him to be with those people, if it's beneficial, of course, because in the line of work he does, it's hospitality, and he has to communicate to people. So you could say that, Xola is a well-rounded person in terms of socializing, networking, getting to know what's going on. He cares. He does care. He's very, very much a caring person. You can see that in his persona. You can see it in his body language. You can see him when he talks. He doesn't get irritated as much. He doesn't. But when he does, he will let you know. He will let you know. Preferably after a couple of possibilities, you might think that you've crossed the line, but you actually haven't, because he will let you know. What we've been going through with the family, I was one of the first people to know. I mean, my lady, his girlfriend, told me first, because she felt, and from what she knew, that I was very close with Xola. Most of the time, talking to him, catching up what's going on in the other side of the world, catching him up what's going on this side of the world. Most communicative, basically, because we keep in touch. Whenever he's back in South Africa, we have to keep in touch. We have to know what's going on, business-wise, social-wise, just friendship, family, brotherhood. So the family, we had to keep it hush for a while we were trying to figure out what was going on in Abu Dhabi. It was stressful. It was very stressful. Knowing very well the COVID situation had just obviously gone to its peak globally. We didn't know what to think, what he could be going through that side of the world. I don't know how the prisons or incarcerations happen, or how they treated in Abu Dhabi. I know very well how they treated here in South Africa, and it's not sanitary. It's not a hotel. It's not a picnic at all. So it was very, very intense for Melinda and I to go through this, right? Trying to figure out the first 3 days what was really going on to Msomi. We couldn't get a hold of him. They wouldn't allow us to communicate with them. Friends over there, from our fellow South Africans who are working with him that side, were basically told not to butt in or join the conversation or find out what's going on or try to figure out what's going on. Only those who were persistent helped us to get what was going on. And it was very frustrating. It was a very, very frustrating time, because we back home here, we got sickly parents, and we worried about a whole lot of things, and not knowing what was going on to Xola was very, very, very frustrating. It was very, very frustrating. It didn't sit well with any of us. I had to tell his brother. His brother knew that after the first 3 days of him not communicating back to his family, it was like, okay, something is not right, So after the fourth day, I had to tell his brother, his older brother, Sele, who had felt that something must have gone on to him. That he started asking me, and I had to tell him what was going on, that he was arrested. As what the charges are, they couldn't actually make sense about it. We couldn't know what was really going on. We had a lawyer that side trying to figure out what is the point of incarceration, why is he being arrested, and if he's being arrested, what are the charges? We need to find that out. so that we knew that we could find or look for the right lawyer that could help out in this situation. It was tough. It was tough. We went through three lawyers, I think. The one didn't know what was going on, swindled us. We had back and forth, found the one, helped us, and another one came down. It was a whole lot of mess. I mean, Melinda was going through the worst, and myself, and after letting Celine know and her sister, younger sister, Lali, we had to then tell Xola's mother, and my aunties. That was the toughest moment right there, because we didn't know what to expect from my mom. My mother alone was very concerned. Aunt was very, very distressed. She was just struck with a whole lot of stress because it's her child. She doesn't know where her child is at in the situation he's in. Knowing that he's a grown-up man, he can handle certain things, but us on this side not knowing what's going on and not being informed, or at least being told by whoever we question on that end of what they can relate to us or what's going on. That was the toughest part. Within the first 2 weeks, we went mad. We were pulling hairs out of our heads. It was not healthy. It was not healthy at all. While we were going through this whole global epidemic, we have a lot of stresses going on here, and then to have, something that's totally out of character. I mean, he's been working in Abu Dhabi for over 6-7 years now. It didn't make sense to any of us, us who are part of his lifestyle, who live with him, who enjoy going out sociable, getting out with friends. We to be told that one of your closest friends, cousins, family member is being arrested for drug trafficking was just what frustrated us the most, because we're trying to figure out where would this start off and why would this start off this way now after all these years. It didn't make sense. So the biggest fear for us was, well, once we knew the situation, how were they going to treat him during this course, staying there, being incarcerated? We didn't know whether they're treating him right. Like I said, the prisons in Abu Dhabi and the prisons in South Africa are probably polar opposites, or probably the exact same. So that alone brought a whole lot of concern to the whole entire family. We had to keep it on a lid, just so we first had to figure out what was going on, because no one in Abu Dhabi, the police, the embassy, most of everybody on that side of the world wouldn't relay the situation on us. Only source of person who's been trying so hard, and we thank her for it every day that she tries and gets communication through to Msomi, and we happen to hear him speak, knowing that he's well. We hear his voice. We've been grateful for Melody. She's done so much more than what we could have on this side of the world, because we've tried going to our embassies. We get told that it's a diplomatic situation. We cannot intervene until the court has deemed such and such and such and such under this case. So our main concern was, what is this case going, and how long is it going to take until we know what's truly going on, and are they going to be fair with what's going on? Because we know the person they're judging. We know the person they're prosecuting. We know him. We know him most probably more than himself. So to be told about someone that you love and care about is being incarcerated because of ... and we've known him more than all the years he's lived in Abu Dhabi, to be told that this is happening was very frustrating. We just couldn't handle it. And we just hope that he is at least set free, or the case goes well, and this whole entrapment that happened to him needs to stop. It needs to be caught out for what it truly is. Because I understand. Even here in South Africa, we got cops and policemen that take incentives. They get incentives for doing certain things. That I won't explain. I don't have proof for, but I've seen it happen. I didn't think it would be the same case happening in Abu Dhabi, in a well-established country like Dubai, in the UAE. I never thought that it would get that far. That if there was a form of corruption, it would get to that point. I don't know if it is corruption. That was the main frustration for most of us in this side of the world, not knowing how they actually deal with it in Abu Dhabi. It was we just hope that the trial is fair, honest, and lenient. We just hope that the prosecutor, the judge, whoever's leading or taking over the case and looking over the case or presiding it, that they are very lenient. They look at his history. They look at the line of job he does, the people he deals with on a daily basis, the environment he's constantly in. They need to know how long he's been there. Has he ever had similar cases like this? Because he has never been arrested here in South Africa. He has never been caught for anything, illegal in South Africa. So for him to be caught for something this big, all the other side of the world, we need to understand it. As his family member, as his family member right here, we need to understand how it got to this point. Not knowing is what drives us crazy and causes so much stress that we need to know. We are grateful for Ms. Radha Stirling for joining this pursuit to find out what's really going on with what's happening in Abu Dhabi. I mean, there's so many other family friends, who've been through similar situations. They've only come out to say this now. They only sharing these stories now that the stories has gone public. We've been trying to keep it within the family just to figure out what is going on first, so we can do as best as we can before we put it on blast. Because we're not too sure whether if we put it out there for the world to know how the UAE treats outside citizens. We didn't want to put it on blast, but we really just need to know what was going on. And we are grateful for Ms. Stirling for putting in the work and effort to expose the current situation in Abu Dhabi, the current situation in the UAE, the current situation in Dubai. I mean, it's just a lot of us here in South Africa still have dreams of working there. I was supposed to follow through, but what's going on is it's not healthy. It's not healthy for anybody to know that their member is that side going through the situation. We're grateful for you, Ms. Stirling, and we hope that this works out for the best. We don't want to take no one's job from no one's job, but we just want our brother back. We want our brother back. We want our sons back. We want our uncle back. I'm speaking for all the nephews that don't know that their uncles is busy being incarcerated, but they've been asking. I'm speaking for his daughter. Who doesn't know really what's going on, hasn't seen his father for over so many long. It's been over we're going towards the third month, fourth month now. And it is not healthy. It is not healthy at all. We want Msomi back. Free Msomi.
And now over to Xola's mother, who works full-time in South Africa. She's appealing for the South African government to get more involved in diplomatically resolving the situation for her son, who she knows has nothing to do with drugs, has never had anything to do with drugs, and is certainly not a drug dealer.
Hi everyone. The reason I'm doing this video is because of the situation we as the Msomi family has found ourselves in. My son, Xola Msomi, was working in Dubai and he's been detained in that country for almost 4 months now. And what is also worrying us, we all as family, is that he's been locked up with an accusation saying that he's been dealing with drug trafficking. I know Xola, he's my son. He will never do something which can jeopardize his staying in Dubai. Especially, he's been in the country for more than 6 years. He knows the laws. He's the kind of person who's always responsible. He cannot just put himself in that situation whereby he cannot even be able to go to the other countries concerning what can be done to him. And my biggest fear that I've watched TV, I've watched news that if a person is detained in Dubai, he can be locked up to like 20 years, 10 years, you name it. So good people, I'm pleading you. I'm pleading all over the world. I'm pleading South African government. Please help us out in this situation. I know him. He's my son. He can never jeopardize what can make his life a misery. To top it all, he's got a 4-year-old daughter, beautiful daughter, who's wondering why my dad is not calling me for almost 4 months now. We can't even tell her that something has happened to your father. Please, I'm begging, I'm asking everybody who can help in any situation. We are begging you to help us in this situation we are in. I thank you.
Now, listening to these appeals from Xola's friends and family, it reminds us of the human toll that a wrongful arrest takes on not only the person who's suffering in prison, but their extended family. The extent that they need to go to advocate for his release and try everything that they can to encourage the South African government to get involved in this situation or to raise money for lawyers who need to represent him, whatever they need to do. It's their sole focus. It's their only focus at this time. And this is something that people just simply don't consider. When the Dubai authorities set someone up or arrest someone because of a third party's allegation, they don't consider the toll that it takes not only on the person that they hold in Dubai, but on their families, their mothers, their fathers, their husbands, their wives, their friends, their cousins, and everyone who has to help them, advocate for them, and try everything they can to secure their release from this wrongful imprisonment. With mounting evidence of wrongful arrests and lengthy detentions on the basis of literally no evidence, it's really important that the South African government respond well to the calls of Xola's families for intervention in this matter. It's no longer acceptable that governments stand by and say we don't get involved in foreign judicial proceedings when the judicial proceedings themselves are questionable. Now, this case definitely warrants intervention from the government, and we hope that with enough lobbying and with enough pressure and investigation and calls for the UAE to seriously investigate the allegations and not just prosecute and convict on the basis of a witness statement or a setup. These setups are not acceptable and they make the country unsafe for foreign nationals. Now, we hope that we'll be able to assist Xola's family to bring him home and that we can speak to him on the other side soon enough. Now, one thing rings true. If a jurisdiction is willing to arrest, hold, charge, convict and sentence someone on the basis of a single person's allegation, then that country is not safe to visit. And many times now we've seen examples of how a tourist or an expat could fall victim to a drug scam that's implemented by police enforcement agencies for their own gain. Now, we've had Darren Crawford, a tourist who was arrested. We've had Arta Legeska, who was in prison for over a year on baseless drugs allegations. And we've had Andy Neal, who was ultimately acquitted after over a year of being detained in a notorious prison in solitary confinement. We've had Arta Legeska write a book about his experience, his torture and rape within the prison. Now, if someone can be arrested and prosecuted on the basis of a single allegation from an informant, for example, this country is simply not safe to travel to. And my question to the UAE now is, what are you going to do about this evidence process that is burdening the country and seeing innocent foreigners locked up for crimes they haven't committed? Those who are facing allegations or charges of drug possession or drug dealing should ensure that they don't sign any confessions or documents in Arabic if they don't understand the language, and certainly shouldn't plead guilty if they're not. They should always seek outside representation, even though they may be discouraged to do so, and should never become a snitch for the police, who don't usually uphold their end of the arrangement and then can use that information that has been provided to them as evidence in the case against the snitch. Anyone who has been arrested for drugs should definitely seek urgent and immediate advice. Thanks for joining us on the Gulf Injustice podcast today. Hopefully we'll be doing a follow-up with Xola directly in the near future once he's released.
Thank you for listening to the Gulf Injustice podcast.